You have probably seen the headline already. BRICS is growing, BRICS is more visible, BRICS is impossible to ignore. That part is familiar, but the familiar version of the story is missing the point. Because what's happening now, it's a transition, it's consolidation, structure, reach, leverage. And while the West keeps talking about a bloc held together by contradictions, the numbers tell a far more serious story. Nearly half the world's population, over a third of global GDP, 26% of global trade. That's a power center taking shape. And this week, from Odisha to Siberia, BRICS moved in ways that show this shift is fully operational. I'm Anastasia from ThinkBRICS. What we do here is simple. We look past the noise and focus on the mechanisms underneath it, the money, the energy, the institutions, the decisions that actually shape power before they make it into the mainstream narrative. No reactionary framing, no empty commentary, just the strategic reality laid out clearly. Let's get into it. Today, we are breaking down the 2026 BRICS agenda through 4 developments from this past week. First, multipolar diplomacy, how the expansion to 11 nations and India's presidency are centering the global south. Second, the new industrial revolution, Siberian AI hubs and the rise of smart partner cities. Third, South-South architecture, a coordinated push for disaster resilience and infrastructure in a world under pressure. And fourth, resource security, the energy transition, the mineral race, and the fight for control over the next era of growth. Let's start where the real shift becomes visible. Under India's 2026 BRICS presidency, the language is humanity first. But the strategy underneath that phrase is pure geopolitics. What we are seeing is a push to move BRICS from a loose, event-driven format into a bloc that is actually institutionalized. That's the difference between symbolism and structure. And structure is where real power lives. Now, look at Zimbabwe. It has officially received the green light to begin formal negotiations to join the new development bank. That may sound technical, almost bureaucratic. It isn't. For a country that has spent decades under economic isolation, this is a gateway into a financial system built around South-South cooperation rather than Western conditionality. That changes what options a government has. And when a country gains options, it gains leverage. Then there is Beijing. China has become something close to the international living room. In the first half of 2026 alone, it hosted 26 leaders from 23 countries, including high-profile visits from the US, Russia, and Canada. At the same time, we are marking 70 years of diplomatic relations between China and Africa. And China has now removed all tariffs on goods from 53 African nations. That means South African, citrus, Rwandan chili, and a long list of other products now enter Chinese ports duty-free. That is not a gesture. That is a recalibration. But here is what the mainstream still misses. This is not only about trade. It's about sovereignty. Washington speaks the language of sanctions. BRICS speaks the language of non-interference. And that difference matters. We saw it clearly when China backed Brazil after the US designated Brazilian criminal organizations as terrorist groups, a move Brasilia saw as interventionist. That was more than a diplomatic response. It was a signal. So what does that tell us about the next layer of leverage? The answer is hidden in the infrastructure. Behind the handshakes and headlines, BRICS is building a digital backbone. In Xiamen this week, the BRICS Forum on Partnership on the New Industrial Revolution launched the Network of Partner Cities. 11 cities, including Durban, Lagos, Wuhan, and Belgrade, are now tied into cooperation on green development and digital transformation. That sounds technical. It is. But technical is where the real game begins. The more interesting move, though, is happening in Siberia. Russia is turning Siberia into a global AI computing hub, and China is already on board as the primary customer. The logic is brutally simple. AI demands massive cooling and massive power. Siberia has both. The climate does half the work for free, 9 months a year, and Soviet-era hydropower dams provide electricity at a fraction of what you would pay in Shanghai or in the West. A 10-megawatt server farm in Siberia costs around $475,000 a month to run. The same setup in Shanghai costs more than 1.1 million US dollars. That gap is not trivial. It is strategic. And this is not just a Russian idea. It is also a Chinese necessity. Chinese electrical vehicle markets like Haval and Geely have increased their use of Russian cloud services 13-fold as they expand across the Russian market. What they are really building is not just cloud capacity. They are building the infrastructure of compliance for a world where data localization is becoming the rule, not the exception. So once again, the question is not what we are seeing. It's who is building the system underneath it. I need to pause for a second. Think BRICS is independent and we rely on you to keep it growing. If these deep dives help you understand the world better, subscribe or support us directly with a super thanks or via Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description. Now let's move to something that rarely gets the headline treatment but affects almost half the human population: disaster risk reduction. Right now, from June the 3rd to 5th, representatives from all 11 BRICS nations are meeting in Puri, Odisha. And that location is not random. Odisha has become a global reference point for cyclone management and early warning systems. So this is not a symbolic summit. It's a practical one. What's emerging here is something they are calling a South-South architecture for disaster resilience. One part of that is the proposed BRICS Himalayan Cryosphere Monitoring Compact, a real-time data framework for tracking glacial retreat across India, China, and Russia. And no, it is not greenwashing. This is strategic survival. Brazil's Atlantic coast, South Africa's Indian Ocean littoral, and China's Pearl River Delta are all climate hotspots. BRICS countries understand that now. So instead of waiting for Western institutions that have talked about loss and damage financing for years and delivered very little, they are building a joint knowledge commons. That is a major shift. In a crisis, whoever controls the data controls the response. And that leads to the harder question: what happens when resilience becomes part of resource strategy? That brings us to the most revealing contradiction of all: energy. In 2025, BRICS nations shattered renewable energy records, adding 497 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity. That boom was driven almost entirely by China and India. On paper, that is a clean energy milestone, and it is. But it's also a split transition. In the same period, the bloc posted its highest net increase in fossil capacity ever, 115 gigawatts. That tension tells you something important. The global south is not going to sacrifice industrial growth in order to satisfy climate targets defined elsewhere. In states like Gujarat, coal generation is falling, even as capacity expands. That tells you the transition is real, but it is not linear. It is being managed on their terms. And then there is the mineral layer. Institutions in India and South Africa have partnered for advanced research into lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. But the real point is not just mining, it's processing, it's recycling, it's control over the battery supply chain from beginning to end. That is where the value sits. Even the oceans are part of this shift now. BRICS nations account for more than 60% of global fish production. Through the blue transformation, they are modernizing artisanal fisheries to secure food systems for 3.5 billion people. That is resource security in its broadest form. Not just energy, not just minerals. Food, water, and the system that holds societies together. So, who actually benefits from all this? If this trajectory holds, then in the next 12 to 24 months, the phrase emerging economies will stop making sense. We are no longer watching these countries emerge. We are watching them lead. From Siberian AI hubs to the resilience compact signed in Puri, the global south is building a parallel system, one where trade, technology, and security are no longer conditioned on Western approval. And here is the part worth remembering. BRICS is turning contradiction into strength. Record renewables alongside fossil growth, diplomacy alongside infrastructure, sovereignty alongside interdependence. That may look messy from the outside, but it is actually what a real multipolar order looks like when it starts taking form. This isn't about replacing the old institutions. It's about making them confront a reality they can no longer pretend is temporary. So, as you look at the week ahead, ask yourself one thing. Are we watching a more fractured world or one that is finally starting to balance itself? Thanks for watching.